Hi, in this video, I'd like to walk you through my paper cutting process. I'll also talk about my preferred tools and my cutting technique. As an example, I will use one of my paper cut templates. You can find a link to this template in the video description. Before starting any new paper cut, I always switch my paper knife blade. I buy mine in boxes of 100. I usually use 1 or 2 blades for artwork of this size and complexity. A sharper blade makes the cuts neater and more precise. It also makes it easier to cut, and so your hand gets less tired. You have to make sure to keep your new and old paper knife blades in a safe place. Even when considered not sharp for paper, they are still very sharp, and so quite dangerous. I always start my work with the most prominent element of the picture. I do so because if something goes wrong at this stage, I can easily start over again. In this example, one of the most important parts of this artwork would be the girl's face. It would be quite difficult to correct mistakes in the most visible areas, like her eyes and mouth. However, shapes like hair are way more forgiving towards minor cut errors. So it makes sense to start paper cutting the most visible area first. I remove paper in small parts. I don't cut out the whole shape in one go. Instead, I carefully remove my paper piece by piece. This technique works for all big and complex forms, and you'll notice that later in the video, I would use the same technique for cutting hands and finger shapes. Doing so makes my paper cuts more precise. It also reduces the risk of torn paper and makes it easier to avoid mistakes. When paper cutting, I move from small elements to big ones, and I make sure there is always plenty of paper left around the cuts. Thin strips of paper could be easily damaged. It is also very easy to unintentionally drag thin paper with the paper knife, so make sure to leave enough paper around the cut. When cutting complex and detailed shapes like, for instance, hair, I try not to jump between the lines. I prefer to choose one direction and follow the lines until the shape is ready. I also cut the lines in groups based on their direction. All this is done to avoid dragging paper and to keep the lines sharp. Paper cutting art requires very little to start with. There are lots of extra tools and materials you can include in your paper cutting practice, but essentially all you need are 3 things: some paper, a paper knife, and a cutting mat. Let's talk about paper first. The paper I'm using here is a 90-gram paper, which would be a little bit heavier than your usual printing paper, but not by much. Any paper heavier than this would be more difficult to cut, especially if you're working with bigger formats or more intricate shapes. For this paper cut, I'm using a paper of a light gray color. This is just my personal preference. You may choose whatever color you like. I prefer to keep my paper cuts in monochrome tones, but I've seen plenty of beautiful examples made out of more colorful paper. If you saw some of my paper artworks, you know that I like my paper cuts to be black when finished. I find paper cutting black paper rather difficult, so instead of cutting my artwork on black paper straight away, I cover my paper cuts with spray paint when they're ready. I use water-based acrylic paint and cover my paper cut with 2 coats of paint from both sides. This method allows me to cut on light paper and to have black paper cut as a finished artwork. Let's quickly jump back to the topic of paper cutting technique, because here's a very good example of how you can cut complex shapes. I could have cut out all the hand shape at once, but because the remaining paper between the fingers is so thin, Cutting everything in one go would definitely damage the paper. Instead, I am cutting my paper in small pieces. This way, I always have a lot of paper around my cut, and the risk of tearing off paper is way lower. Let's come back to the topic of paper cut materials. To make such intricate paper cuts, you need a paper knife. Sometimes it's called an X-acto knife. If you're just starting up with paper cutting, most likely you would have a slim silver paper knife. Those are the most common ones, and they are great to start with. I prefer to use a knife with a slightly heavier handle and a rubber band for a better grip. I feel like it sits better in my hand, and eventually, over time, my hand gets less tired. The last essential element in the paper cutting material list is a cutting mat. It is also sometimes referred to as a self-healing mat. It took me a few attempts to find a mat that I liked, because I prefer to cut on a soft cutting mat, which means the mat has to have multiple rubber layers and be of a high quality. I prefer my cutting mat to be of a slightly bigger size than the paper cut I'm working on. In this example, my artwork is size A4 and my cutting mat is A3. Having a bigger mat just makes it so much more convenient to cut. Also, you don't have to be afraid of catching your paper cut on the corners of the mat, so the chances of accidental damage are way lower. As a final step, I cut out the outer shape of the paper cut. I use a metal ruler to cut out straight lines. I may use these paper leftovers for some other small paper cuts. A good thing about cutting out the outer shape at the very end is if you'd like to add any more extra details, you can still do so. For instance, if I would like to add more volume to the girl's hair, or to add some background decorations, like stars or flowers, there's still plenty of paper to work with. Having this much reserve paper leaves me enough room to improvise before I finish my paper cut. And just like this, the paper cut is ready. I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions about paper cutting, you can ask them in the comments section of this video, and I'll answer as soon as I can. I've added a few extra links in the video description that I think you may find helpful. Happy crafting! Until next time.